Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to acknowledge that the City and Borough of Juneau is on unceded Tlingit land and wish to honor the Indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Kunachish.
Thank you, Ms. Treem. Instead of a roll call, so that we could introduce everybody that's here today, I was going to allow for roundtable introductions. Ms. Treem, if you would start and just introduce yourself for everybody else.
Okay. I'm Carol Treem, a member of the Assembly.
Greg Smith from the Juneau Assembly.
Wade Bryson, the Chair of Public Works and Facilities.
And I am Michelle Hale, also a member of the Juneau Assembly.
I'm Sherry Lane. I'm from the CBJ Law Department.
I'm Ken Symington. I'm the District Manager for Alaska Waste.
And I'm Jim Denson, Area Environmental Protection Manager for Waste Management.
Excellent. So welcome everybody today. And I want to give a special thank you to the audience members for coming in, participating in this. Are there any requests for agenda changes? Seeing none, our agenda is approved. So we're going to dive right in for Waste 101 to give a general overview of where we're at right now. And I believe that is Deputy Director, Ms. Koch.
Yes, hello. I'm going to keep this very short. Can you hear me well through the mask? Okay, great. Is the presentation up? All right, solid waste in Juneau. Next slide, please. I just wanted to give everybody an overview of the basics before we dive into. I know there are going to be a lot of much more detailed questions and some good discussion, but it's always good to start with the basics. In terms of for our garbage, for waste hauling, you'll see that is Alaska Waste with Ken Symington here. That's our provider, and they are regulated in Juneau by the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. That trash goes to the landfill. The landfill is owned and operated by Waste Management with our representative Jim Denson here. The Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, also sometimes known as DEC, does have some regulatory authority over the landfill, although it's mainly in the environmental realm versus the operational. EPA always, as having oversight over DEC, always has purview in the environmental world. And then at the last, that last picture there, you see local government. So since CBJ does not play a role in trash hauling, we don't regulate the landfill. The way that we really participate is in some of these other items like recycling center, junk vehicles, and household hazardous waste. Can you go to the next slide, please? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. You'll see, and many people are familiar with the recycling center. We're recycling about 5% of the landfill's annual volume. That's about a 5-year average. There's some variety in that, but that's generally the ballpark that we're in. That recycling center is used both by, I think a lot of Juneau residents are familiar with going to the landfill, using the recycling center in that way. So you can voluntarily bring your recyclables there, and it's source segregated. There is also a portion of that facility that is used by Alaska Waste, who is hauling commingled recycling when people voluntarily opt for that. And then in the middle, you'll see hazardous waste. Much like the recycling center and actually junk vehicles, these are areas where CBJ has contracts with private companies that actually are the ones that are doing the work. It's not CBJ employees. So this is where you could bring your household hazardous waste. We mentioned cooking oil because we always want to try and give a good plug for please don't put your cooking oil down the drain. That comes into play with wreaks havoc on our sewage treatment facility, and it's part of source control that we've had different conversations about on different days. But we anytime we have an opportunity, we try and say, please don't put your cooking oil down the drain. You could bring it the household hazardous waste, and if you're a resident, that is a free service. And we have a contractor who does that work for us. Then on the last one is junk vehicles. That's once again, we have CBJ contracts with a private entity who does that work. It's a program where people have the opportunity to voluntarily surrender a vehicle. And then there are also vehicles that could get tagged and they wind up in that program as well. Next slide, please. So this is the what's in our trash. So on that pie chart, that information is coming from EPA. So this is not based on a CBJ waste analysis, but this is a good place to start. We'd assume that CBJ has the composition of our waste is pretty similar to other places. And in 2021, you could see we have this breakdown. We generally we have in the order of about 30,000 tons of trash that goes to the landfill, and we want to sort of break out a little bit of the municipal solid waste, which I think most people think of as just trash, sort of the common sense. And there's been some discussion about construction and demolition waste, so we wanted to pull that out and wanted to thank Waste Management for their help in getting some of that data. And that is the short, high-level overview of who does what for garbage and solid waste in Juneau.
Excellent. Thank you, Deputy Director Koch. Mr. Denson, would you like to add on anything to our basic 101 trash?
No, I think it was well covered. I do think though, you know, as we talked early on, that Juneau needs to do a material study on their waste that actually goes into the landfill. That pie chart is fairly correct, and but each community is a little different, you know, and before you can start making decisions, policy decisions and other decisions, you got to know what going into the landfill, especially around garbage. So
Sounds like an interesting job. All right, Mr. Symington, would you like to add anything, sir?
No, I don't. Thanks.
Excellent. All right. So that is our basic high level. Mr. Smith, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note, like, if I have questions on what we presented there, is now the time to ask those? Or?
Yeah, we can cover a couple things on the basic 101 of trash.
Very good, thanks. I guess, is there Juneau specific waste, whatever it's this, is there a Juneau specific like weight breakdown of the waste, either through Waste Management or?
I think that is the reference of the material study would give us that answer. Is correct? Is what?
Okay, so where's the material study?
No, he just said that we need to do one.
Okay, so we don't have one.
No.
Okay, thanks.
Any additional questions from the group? Ms. Hale.
This is for Ms. Or Deputy Director Koch. You mentioned that the programs are voluntary, the CBJ's recycle program and household hazardous waste. It's mostly, and the junk vehicles, I guess it's mostly just to make sure it's on the record that I'm assuming it's illegal to pour hazardous waste down the sewer drain. So even though
Yes.
we have a voluntary program, it's against the law to do that. And
That is
also
correct.
to dispose of it in bodies of water. And I just want to get that on record.
Yes,
Thank
that
you.
is correct.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. So we broke this up into three parts: short-term, long-term, or short-term, medium-term, and long-term solutions. And I thought the best strategies will just start going down some of these short-term questions. And as other questions come up from the short-term as they apply to that, then we can address those as well. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Just curious about the flow. Like, I do want to hear public testimony if people have it. So I'm not sure, you know, when are we cutting off on these questions?
I was going to try and save the last half hour of the meeting for public testimony. How many, Madam Mayor, do you have how many people are signed up back there? Okay, so we might not need 30 minutes. All right. Mr.
Question.
Let me get Mr. Denson. And
I just wanted to respond to Commissioner Hale's comment, and
Oh, sure.
absolutely right. Putting it down the drain is illegal, but it's also not, while out of a household, it's not illegal to put it in landfill. It's not the right thing to do because we have all those hazardous chemicals sitting in the landfill, you know, so that program is really important.
Excellent. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we have any representatives from DEC or any other agencies here today, or is?
We should have Bob Blankenberg from DEC. He's the program
Okay, I
manager
saw
for
his name.
solid waste.
Okay, great.
Okay.
If we have any questions that come up, thank you
Perfect.
very much.
All right. Any additional questions from the committee? All right, well, let's dive into short term. And I think the best way is just kind of go down these, get the basic answers that we can. What percentage or estimate of Juneau residents don't have trash hauling service? How many homes aren't being serviced? And alternatively, how many households do you provide garbage service to? And how many do you provide recycling service to? And I think this is for Alaska Waste.
Thank you. So Denise was kind enough to help with a little bit of data. Wasn't quite sure exactly how many single family homes versus multiple family homes there were in Juneau. So she provided me the single family homes. So it identifies anybody that has, you know, individual families, and the number's about 8,100 homes are the single from the assessor's office. And we provide about 91% based on our individual residents, about 91% of that. And we have a really great take rate or a percentage in the recycling. About 46% of that is taking advantage of the recycling curbside.
Excellent.
Yes.
Ms. Hale.
So 46% of the 8,100 homes do curbside recycling?
We do 91% of the 8,100 homes we have curbside with, and 46% of that
Does the
does
recycling? Super, thank you.
46 of the 91.
Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Bresson. Do we provide any commercial curbside recycling service? And if not, why not?
Commercial recycle.
Currently, right now, the recycling for commercial is in the same roll carts. We don't provide them currently in the rear load containers, which are what we consider commercial, but the commercial businesses can do it in the roll carts, and we provide multiple roll carts. You see them often downtown with the blue lids. Those are all recycling lids. So that's how the commercial is primarily done.
All right. And seeing Ms. Hale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Symington. Symington. Yes. Thank you for being here. So of the curbside recycling, I do that and I do my best, but I do find myself wondering, am I doing this right? So once it gets to the landfill, how is it? I mean, how good a job are Juneau residents doing with what they put in their recycle bin? And actually, I do know that early on I was putting wine bottles in there and somebody called me up and said, you can't do that. So somebody's paying attention.
I think if we have, thank you so much for the question. I think if we have feedback, we can provide those individually, but I think on the receiving side at the landfill processing center, they would be better to, I don't really know kind of what that contamination level is or what they've been seeing at this point. So I'm not sure.
Mr. Denson, can you speak to the contamination level of recyclables?
No, but I think Denise, it's reported to the city, right, through the recycling program.
As we go down the line, we do have Stuart Ashton, who runs our recycling center. I'm not sure if you have any perspective on if you wanted to sit up here for a moment and talk about the contamination rates.
Can you ask the question again, please?
Ask all the questions, save your questions, and then I'll.
The question, I guess it's called contamination rate, but the question is basically those of us that do the curbside recycling, how are we doing? I mean, are we putting things in there that shouldn't be in there? Are we not putting things in correctly, et cetera?
Yep, I can only speak to my observations at the recycling center, since obviously Alaska Waste Services private business, but from my observations, it's pretty, if you look at national standards, curbside is anywhere from 30 to 75% contaminated. It depends on the community. If the community cares, it's better. It's not here. It's pretty good. Again, this is just for me observing this. The source separated is much better, but you know, you get to choose either one. I'd say it's pretty good. We haven't had many complaints on our side and as we have those communications. But again, remember, single stream is going to have more contamination because people wishful recycle a lot. And the general rule now, and the industry can confirm, is that recycle right or don't recycle at all because it's making it worse. Does that answer your question?
It answers my question, and I would maybe stemming from this, we can provide some feedback to the community because that's really great information.
So I'm going to change things up just a little bit, just so that we can, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Denson. Yes, go ahead, Ms. Stream.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This one's really quick. Just curious if you have a service area cutoff on garbage pickup, or if you would go, all the way out the road to pick up garbage.
Mr. Simonton, service area.
I think we covered all the road areas, and I apologize. I'm new to the market, so I've only been here 3 months, so I'm pretty confident that we have all the road service covered with our services.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to change things up just a tad bit for the sake of time. I want to get through the list of short-term questions, and then I'll go back to questions from the committee. So that way we can burn through every question, get as many answers as possible. I'm going to move to question 2. Could there be less expensive options beside weekly hauling service? Example, every other week. Is there a less expensive option?
Thank you. So generally, we look at how the level of support we provide the customers by the size of container rather than frequency. Most of our cost is driven by things we still have to have the drivers, still have to have the trucks, a lot of the fixed things, and the frequency has a little bit less impact to it. For example, a 96 gallon versus a 48, it's half the volume. It's only less than $6 difference in price. So we generally just try to support what that customer needs. So by just the size of container.
Excellent. How can Juneau residents with trash hauling service get rid of items that don't fit in a trash can, like a large mattress or tires? And does your company have the labor available to handle a significant increase in requests for this service if advertised?
Absolutely. Just give us a call. So if you have something that needs to be picked up, you can just give us a call, whether you're a current customer or you want to just do a bulk pickup on a one-off basis, you can give us a call. If you're a current customer and you need to add a bulk pickup, we can just add that to the route, and we pick up bulk requests every single day.
I'm taking lots of notes. Could Saturday hours for residential drop-off at the landfill be expanded? Are there any plans to further reduce residential drop-offs at the landfill or eliminate it completely?
So no plans to reduce anymore. And in the current state of affairs, no, I don't think there's any opportunity to expand the service for public past what they are currently. And I will just say that, the first day we were open, I get it, it was snowing, but no one showed up until 10 o'clock and there was 9 truck, right? You were there.
Yeah.
As the weather warms up, we get more, right? But it's still not they're not lining up out into the street at this point on Saturday. So.
Excellent. What would it take to establish a transfer station that gives residents more opportunities to dispose of trash? Please speak to site needs, staff availability, cost to residents, and or CBJ. Could either one of you speak to what a transfer site might look like? We'll just use the example of the Valley residents.
Yeah. So anytime you cite a transfer station, there's an additional cost, right? Because you have to collect it, you have to move it, and then you have to move it to the landfill. So the disposal's still there. Costs are still there. For us at the landfill, I think the short-term solution is like we've talked about, like I've talked about publicly here in these meetings, is that we need a public drop-off area, right, at the landfill. That does several things for us, right? It keeps the small operators, the public, out and away from the commercial vehicles. It's a safety issue, but I would say equal to safety. You know, we have to be able to manage the more people that want to be able to dump, the wider the working face, the larger the working face. We have to have at the landfill to accommodate those people, unless we want to have them line up outside the road. So ultimately, public drop off would give us a place to have people to be able to unload. We could pick those things up as they're filled and move them one by one to the landfill, shortens our working face. That working face is really important because it rains a lot here, right? So when there's no cover on that working face, there's rainwater goes into there and that causes leachate issues. But maybe more importantly, and what we really have been working hard on is odors, right? These massive working faces that we had in the years past because of many different things, including having to make room for everybody, caused significant odors. And we don't want to operate landfills that way. So, you know, a public drop off, first phase, I think is a public drop off area at the landfill. It's going to have to be covered. It'll have to be in a building. And, but it could be constructed such that in 20 years, when the landfill has to close or when it's full, it could be longer than that. If we could reduce the amount of waste that's going into the landfill, lengthen the amount of time that the landfill's available. But it could also be then made into a transfer station for the future.
Okay. Ms. Simon, did you want to add to that?
I have nothing.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. What would a trash cleanup day look like? Where could it be held? How would it be staffed? What's the maximum amount of waste that could be accepted at one time? What would it cost CBJ if it was free to the residents? And I believe we've had a community cleanup time period before. Would you guys care to speak to it?
Yeah, so Chair Bryson, my awareness right now is we have several ways that community cleanups can happen. One is for a youth group, something like that, to petition the landfill. We give that, they can go out and they can do garbage pickup on the roads, community enhancement, community beautification. That material, once we approve it, when they collect it, can come to the landfill free, right? So that is open to all youth groups, things like that. And then I think once a year right now, we have with it's a pretty well established organization. I'm losing the name. Litter free. Thank you. Have litter free. That again is not people bringing their household garbage to litter free and then litter free bring it to landfill. It's community beautification, right? Cleaning up the roadways, cleaning up parks, whatever. And that, we do that typically on Earth Day, kind of fits. And that also is free. So there's, at this point, there's no limit to that. And really, I guess the cap is how many people you can get, to volunteer to go out and do the work, right? So.
Mr. Simon?
Thank you. The only thing I would add is just trying to figure out what we're trying to, if what we have going right now with litter free, the event that comes up and these other events, do we have a reason to think we need to do different? And what would that look like? And what opportunities might be out there to do that?
Excellent. Correct me if I'm wrong. I want to say it was in 2018 that we had community cleanup week, and there were 3 locations in 28. No, what was the one that was in Lemon Creek where they picked a property in Lemon Creek, and for a week you could just throw all your trash in. They brought a roll off. It was in Lemon Creek. I mean, I used it. It had to have been in 2018 or 2019. or maybe 2017.
That was a targeted cleanup through the CDD and enforcement, and it was a trial. And we had to close it within 1 day because so much trash came in, we couldn't handle it. And that was from a small.
Okay, that's exactly what I was remembering. Okay, thank you, Mr. Stewart. We'll continue rolling here forward. Construction debris. How do you manage construction debris in the landfill? Are there plans for the landfill to stop accepting construction debris? And based on the presence in other communities, are there better options for construction debris versus just disposing it in the landfill?
That's a really good question. Whoever had that. Currently it's construction debris is just disposed in the landfill along with the municipal solid waste. There are no plans to restrict that. What we would like to see is what I've talked about before is how we handle drywall in this city. Drywall in a lot of older homes has asbestos in it. We don't want our people, the people that are around the landfill or our customers exposed to asbestos. So, talked about beefing up construction, building demolition requirements to have asbestos surveys before they bring it out. Really need to minimize the amount of drywall that we can put in the landfill. We can take it, and we will take it, because if everybody has their way, that may be the only thing that's left, right? But the drywall causes hydrogen sulfide to form in the landfill, which causes that rotten egg odor that you get well, I'll say it, we used to get from the landfill, right? I think we've done a lot better job with odors and tighten things down in that, and folks, are hurting for that, but it's something that we have to do to make sure we minimize the odors.
This is for DEC. Are there any solid waste regulations that prevent or promote the reuse of construction debris?
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. This is Bob Blankenberg. I'm the program manager for solid waste program.
Mr. Blankenberg, thank you for joining us. We hear you loud and clear. Do you have an answer for solid waste regulations that prevent or promote reuse of construction debris?
We have regulations that I guess kind of both. I mean, it is a regulated waste. However, we do have a couple of paths forward to promote reuse. Obviously you can segregate out if some component of the waste stream has value, it can get segregated out before it even gets into the waste stream. And like if there's wood that can be reused or whatever, and we don't really even have to get involved then. Some components of the waste stream are exempt to start with. Bricks, mortar, Portland cement. Sometimes that can, if you can get it out and it's clean, it can be used for other purposes, fill, what have you. We have beneficial reuse plan approval ability for a couple of options. One is reusing solid waste as structural fill, and that's one where you could if you had something that was a decent substitute for fill and was clean, we could approve that. That would be one option. Another one that we haven't seen as much is using solid waste as a component in a manufactured product. And that's certainly a possibility. And I guess it would be up to, an entrepreneur or something to figure out an option there. Some components of the C&D waste stream can pose, an increased risk or concern. One of the gentlemen previously mentioned the wallboard and the hydrogen sulfide gas issue, and that is a real potential concern that you have there with that particular stream. Also, depending on the era of the building you're demolishing, you could have lead-based paint, which also poses a, a concern. Not to mention, we also, I think one of the gentlemen mentioned asbestos, and asbestos being in the waste stream is also a challenge and a risk. So I think probably that's the summary. We certainly have some options to get some of those components out of the waste stream.
Thank you, Mr. Blankenberg.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to continue on here. What is the current fine for illegal dumping? How difficult is it to enforce illegal dumping rules? And can the fine be increased? I believe this is for Ms. Lane.
Thank you, Chair Bryson. So the current fine is under the litter ordinances. It's under Title 36, and the fine can range anywhere from $5 to $200 for a first offense, and then it's $250 to $300 for subsequent offenses. We're really limited by state statute. Our maximum fine can be $500 per violation. So it's not a situation where we can do a per day. It's per violation, and this is only for public property. This isn't for private property. So we're not going to go out and give litter tickets for private property. We do have other tickets that we could give for private property. There's, the bear attractant, depending on what kind of trash you have. JPD handles those tickets. And then CDD has a lot of enforcement options that they try to pursue when they're looking at big piles of trash and debris and stuff on private property. I think the Assembly is aware of how hard that is to pursue those. With respect to enforcement of trash on public property and dumping of trash on public property, it's a matter of being able to prove it and who did it. So I don't know that we have a lot of success for those tickets.
Thank you, Ms. Lane. All right, let me open back up to questions from the committee. Hopefully you're taking notes of your questions through the time. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Hopefully I'm categorizing them correctly in short, medium, and long term. I don't know. No, I know that, but I didn't know if my question is a short, medium, or long term question. So anyway, I guess I'm curious to know if we've seen increased illegal dumping as since the landfill hour reduction and cost increases have gone into place.
I believe that would be Ms. Lane at law. Have you heard of any addition?
Or Ms. Custer, maybe.
Right. Yeah. I haven't heard. I mean, anecdotally, you can look online and see a lot of posts on social media about, big piles of stuff, and you can see it all around town. But whether that's always been a problem or if it's increased.
I would jump in and say that I think there's always some element of illegal dumping around, trailheads and other areas. This question was in here because there was a lot of sensitivity that after the landfill had restricted their hours, that we were going to see sort of rampant illegal dumping. There's probably been a little bit of an increase, but it hasn't been rampant. I haven't heard, usually you've got lots of departments. So streets deals with cleaning up, utility deals with cleaning up, docks and harbors, parks and rec. I haven't heard of a dramatic increase from the public works and engineering side. I'm not sure if George, if you've noticed anything dramatically increased from Parks and Rec in terms of, okay.
All right. Excellent. Ms. Green.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Just keep going.
I just wanted to quickly comment on number 2, and then I do have a question, but I think
Sure.
that if you go any longer than weekly hauling service, bears become a big issue. And Mr. Symington has not been here long enough probably to see the bears yet, but they're coming. It is time. So it'll be a fun thing for you to work on. So that's my comment on number 2, but I do have a question, and that is, what happens to recycled materials that are contaminated either through the pickup service or the drop-off service? Do they still get shipped out of town?
Yes. And it's very costly. Essentially what you're doing is you're taking what everybody thinks is a commodity. You're spending a lot of money to package it up, get it on a barge, send it to Seattle, have a facility go through it and sort it for commodities. And the contamination rate, do you not get contamination rate from our folks? All right. We have it.
Find that out.
You should get it. So that's something for me, but ultimately, you know, there's a very high cost for contamination, and that contamination, whatever's contaminated, whatever can't be used as a commodity or sold as a commodity, goes to the landfill. And which is even more interesting because those facilities then package that up, put it on a train, and it goes to Arlington, Oregon, into a landfill. So it goes from here to Seattle, where there's a lot of cost added to it, and then there's a significant cost that's added to it that, by the time it gets to Arlington, Oregon.
Follow up.
Go ahead.
I remember having this conversation in a public works meeting with Director Vigio. So that must have been quite a while ago. You know, we're paying a lot of money to ship recycled material out so that it doesn't go into the landfill here, which is fine because we have limited life on the landfill, but we're just paying to send it out to put it in the garbage somewhere else. So I liked what somebody said about wishful recycling, and I think that we should do a better job of explaining to the public where their recycled material is going to go, or we just keep paying to ship it out because we need the room in the landfill.
Thank you, Ms. Stream. Were you waiting for a quick response, Mr. Denson?
Yeah, just real quick. Public education is really, really important, and regular public education. You can't say it and then wait 5 years, right? Because commodity prices, commodity value changes daily, right? So a really strong community, once you have, you know, curbside recycling and those types of things, community education on what to put in the can is very, very important.
Thank you. I believe we're at Ms. Sale now. Back to you.
Thank you. I have two questions.
Go ahead.
One is just a follow-up on what you put in the can. So doing curbside recycling with only one can that be done successfully, or is it better to go to a model where there's multiple cans for the different types? I mean, if nobody is doing, if people are not doing wishful recycling and they're just putting the things they should in there, can that be successful?
It is in most of the United States. We
Thank
call
you.
that single stream recycling. Yeah.
Okay.
Because ultimately what we see, if it's too hard, right? And please correct me if I'm wrong. It's too hard for the public to decide what should go and what can. It goes in the garbage, right? So making it the less complicated, the more simple that the community can make their recycling program be, the more successful it's going to be.
Okay, thank you. I do have one more question.
Go ahead, Ms. Sale.
Thank you. This is back to the first question about percentage of Juneau residents that have trash hauling. If there were a way, either by city ordinance or somehow with the state, to require every Juneau resident to have trash pickup, because of economy of scale, would the rates go down a little bit if everybody had to do it? I mean, would that drop the rates a little?
Certainly, the larger volume of folks that are participating drives the cost down for everybody. Are you talking about trash specifically or recycling?
I'm talking about trash, that 91% of Juneau residents that
Okay.
have trash pickup. So if that were 100%, might we expect to see a few dollars knocked off our bill?
Possibly.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to the kind of commingled versus segregated recycling stream, I guess. I'm just trying to think, is there, First off, could you address that commingled recycling actually does get recycled? Because I hear the rumor that, oh, it gets thrown in the landfill. And then I guess the part of that is just like, I don't know how to phrase this exactly, but how much more valuable are the single sources? Obviously, it depends on the commodity, but anyway, like, could you just talk briefly about like the benefits of, the separated, segregated versus the commingled, maybe like economically or whatever?
For material recovery facilities, there are none, because whether it's source separated, single stream, or a little bit of what we do here, we take a bale of this material and it's all a bottle, the plastic bottles, right? And we number twos or whatever, and we put that in the bale. Well, that goes to the material recovery facility and it's put on the same floor, put on the same product line, because there are things in those materials, even though they're source separated, like bottle caps, right? And other things that are contaminants. So we have to go through it all, whether you source separate it or not, right? We could, I guess there are ways to not have to go through source separated recyclable materials. But what happens is the commodity price goes way down because the people that are buying those materials have to go through them again, right? So the value in source separation, it's helpful because the line can go faster, a little faster, but it still has to go over the same belt, right?
Ms. Reed? All good, Mr. Smith? All right, thank you. So I want to ask a couple questions here. Going to the Saturday, it makes a lot of sense to me that you reduce that public, because I remember how crazy you could get up there. Although the one thing that I noticed is that it's not going to be busy at 8 o'clock. I didn't know that I was going to be doing a dump run until about 9 o'clock that morning when it stopped snowing. Would it be possible to make, instead of doing 8 to noon, maybe do like 10 to 2? Because Tommy, the scale operator, I've known the guy since he was born. He asked me for my ID for me to go on Saturday. And I was like, oh, okay, Tommy. But I anecdotally was telling that it's never busy in the morning because it takes a little bit of time. You don't want to load up on Friday night. Would it be possible to maybe back it up a little bit, still give us shortened, but 10 to 2, what happens is his 11 o'clock hour was busy every week. So it was just the 1 hour because you're pressed for time now. You got to get in there.
I think we could take that. That's a good idea. I'm not going to say that we're going to do it. But let me take it back to Mike and the team and see if we can accommodate that. I think that's reasonable in my mind. So
excellent. Thank you. And then the public drop off. We used to have giant recycle containers at both high school parking lots. And my understanding was that we had closer to an 11% recycle rate when we had 2 dumpsters at each high school, but then we got so much contaminant that it caused the problem.
Lots of contamination.
Now we're down to 5% recycling. How could we go back to that higher level of recycling, but maybe in a more efficient way so we don't have as much contaminant?
Absolutely. The first thing with the remote drop boxes was our volume is voluntary and we wanted to increase it, and we figured we build to them and they will come. And that's what happened. But the material that was coming into the recycling facility dropped by more than the amount that was being delivered. So we started getting less material and contamination, toilets, boats, dead carcass animals. That's stuff that I had to deal with. That's the level of contamination that we were talking about on a weekly basis. So that's my pitch. There was a lot of big issues during the time when we were doing 11%. We were actually doing closer to 14%, but that was more reflective of the time. 2008, the late 2000s, the nation was recycling far more than they were now. Our numbers for the past since the 90s pretty mirror the national average. There was a big peak. We were in it. it dropped off. 2018, the China Sword Act completely threw the recycling world and carbon in general in disarray. That made a big drop off. And then COVID and the last 5, 6, 7 years, it's pretty brutal everywhere.
Thanks, sir. All right. Did I get all the questions for short term? Does everybody feel like they have a clear picture of short term? Director Kester, I see you joining us on Zoom. Was there anything that you'd like to add or any questions that you had for us? All right. Thank you for joining us today. So let's continue to move forward to midterm. What can we do in the next few years to change the volume that we're dealing with? And we'll just go down same style. What facets of waste hauling and landfill does RCA regulate? Could another entity beside Alaska Waste apply for the certificate of public convenience and necessity? Does somebody want to speak to maybe give us a definition or like an explanation of that certificate of public convenience and necessity? Is that you, Director Koch, Deputy Director Koch?
Well, I'll pinch hit here because we really wanted Regulatory Commission of Alaska to come here to address questions for them. But they decided not to do that. But I had a conversation with them previously in about February. They certainly regulate refuse and waste hauling in Alaska, very, very common. They actually have on the Regulatory Commission of Alaska website, they've got a library. You could look up the certificates of convenience that other communities in Alaska have. And it is it's very common that communities have the certificate of convenience everywhere from Matsu, Anchorage, Palmer, Ketchikan, Sitka, the list goes on and on and on. So there are many, many communities in Alaska that have a certificate. I had also asked them just some, I was interested in knowing whether or not there was only one certificate, that there was a prohibition, for example, could only one entity have a certificate of convenience and public necessity? And they said there wasn't any rules that sort of limited an area to just having one certificate. I asked them what types of applicants there could be for certificates. Do they have to be private? Can they be public? Essentially, they could be both. As you would imagine with an entity that a body that's mostly made up of lawyers, they're pretty they're not going to commit to whether or not they would give a certificate of convenience to another location. They can't make those decisions until they see the quality of the application. So, but certainly more than one entity in a community could apply.
All right. Can RCA regulate operations or pricing for waste hauling or for the landfill?
It was my understanding that they do not regulate pricing and at the landfill. They do have tariff documents for waste hauling. And they are, as part of that tariff document, they are involved in evaluating the costs for waste hauling and making decisions on that.
Excellent. Mr. Remington, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so from the waste hauling side, from the collection side, we go through a rate case where we communicate, and it's a all public process. We provide the cost of operations. We provide what our pricing, what we would like to have as pricing. It's a public forum, back and forth questions, and somewhere along the way we'll land on a price, and that becomes a fixed price that is set between any rate cases, depending on where it's at. And so, yeah, it's a very public process. And so what we do establish, they do kind of set our rates, and we're not allowed to move away from that. And that goes along with any of the changes we make as it relates to our tariffs. Any changes at all that we make, it's all public, and we provide what we would like to do, and here's why, and we'll get questions back and forth. And you think about it, they're there for the consumers, right? They're on the behalf of the consumers, and to make sure that everything's looked at pretty close, and they get pretty detailed. I mean, sometimes we'll even get down to individual transaction expense items during the rate case process. So it's a very thorough, very long process, but they certainly do. Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. Yes, Ms. Stream.
How often does that happen?
Well, it depends on the markets. Typically, there's an agreed apart when we do one rate case, when we'll do the next, if there's any sort of changeover. And we're in the middle of a rate case right now, taking our data from 22, and then we'll be submitting it. And then there's a process and a time period that their RCA will review it, and then we'll go back and forth. So it kind of fluctuates a little bit depending on the market.
All right, very good. Can the assembly regulate waste hauling and landfill in the borough? For example, can the assembly regulate the waste hauler or landfill's consumer costs, costs of operations, or what items the landfill will accept? I believe this is from Ms. Lane.
No.
No.
So the assembly and the CBJ can regulate the landfill just as they can regulate any other business in Juneau. So there can be a conditional use permit, which I believe the landfill has. There can be conditions put on that. We can regulate it just like we would do any other kind of business. But I think it's a DC that probably has the bigger regulatory authority on that.
Okay. Questions? Ms. Hale?
Can CBJ require that every household in Juneau have trash pickup?
So looking at the some of the examples around the state, these municipalities that have code in their CBJ code and in their code to require trash pickup, they have their own landfills, or they have contracts with landfills where they have control over the pricing. So I haven't seen anywhere they require the trash pickup, but then the landfill and trash pickup is both, it's completely separate from the municipalities. So could we do it? We probably could, but we would probably have to care for the fact that we don't have a municipal run waste pickup or landfill. And how are we going to, how are we going to enforce it? How are we going to control that when we have no control over the pricing? So it may be doable, but I haven't seen it in looking at the research.
Ms. Ream?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to kind of build off of this question, maybe I'm taking my VITF influence and thinking, what are ways we can incentivize the behavior we want? And I would plant that question in the minds of Director Kester and Deputy Director Koch as something that this committee could maybe noodle on in the future.
Excellent. And if either of you gentlemen were thinking of incentives that we could use to incentivize the community to be everybody on the same page, we would be open for incentives. Mr. Smith. Oh, and then I'll be back to you. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Lane, why can't we regulate any of those things?
That's a great question. So it really goes down to, the landfill is a business just like any other business. So we can, CBJ can regulate them just like we would regulate any other business. Like there's nothing super, we don't have anything in our code that's super special about how we can single out a landfill business or single out a waste collection business and treat them any other way than we treat other businesses. In our code, I think as you know, we have a different section in our code for marijuana businesses. We've singled that out and we've put a separate section in that. And some of that is because, the state also regulates that and we're able to do that. So there's nothing that we have right now that would allow us to put any other special kind of regulations and single out landfill or waste collection businesses, aside from what we have on the conditional use permit and our enforcement mechanisms that we use on all businesses.
Follow up, sir.
Thank you. So I think it's CBJ code that says bars must close at 1 p.m. or whatever on certain days and all that stuff. But the state law is different, I believe. So we couldn't enact new code through an ordinance that says landfills must, anyway, I'm just trying to figure out why we're not able to take an action like that.
I mean, you can enact a code that says all landfills in the CBJ must be open 5 days a week, but there's only one landfill. So, it would be different if there's one bar. You're enacting something that covers, the whole town, and saying this is when they have to close. But to say, I'm going to put it on all landfills, but there's only one landfill. So that means you're singling out that particular business to say that you're going to tell them how to do business, essentially. It's different if you say, no, say we had 5 landfills and you're like, landfills must be open at least a minimum of 2 days a week. I think, I'm thinking more about, why don't more people in town have trash service, and incentives for trash service. And I don't know I don't know if it's just cost prohibitive, if that is why people don't have trash service. So I don't know if anybody has any insight into, is it just because people don't want to pay for it? And is there some kind of program that we could do to help with that?
Very good, sir. Well, I've got,
I guess I'm not saying that we're going to take those things. And maybe I can just dig a little deeper. I'm not a lawyer, but anyway, I just don't know why we can continue that offline or something. I just don't know why we're not able to really.
I'm going to let Mr. Denson answer. Then I have a question for Ms. Hale and then Ms. Stream.
I would say that it's much more expensive to bring your weekly trash to the landfill than it is for him to pick it up.
Ms. Hale.
So this actually builds on Ms. Stream's talking about incentivizing, but also what you just said, Ms. Lane. I do know of people that save up their trash, and it's going to be more expensive now if they bring their trash to the landfill than it used to be. But save their trash up sometimes for like months, and it gets pretty stinky, and then they load it in the back of their truck and bring it to the landfill, and it is a cost factor. And I wonder, on top of incentivizing, like Ms. Stream says, if we think about some kind of even a CBJ program or some kind of a program where we help low-income families if they need that assistance. Yeah.
I want to include also that somebody shared a story with me specifically about this, that they don't produce enough trash to fill up the 48-gallon even once a week. They recycle so heavily, and they just saved up, and it was like once a month they would take a pickup load, and that we were discussing the alternatives now that wasn't a practical option, but it was 2 people at home that aren't buying a lot of stuff. They're just not producing a lot of trash. I digress. I'm sorry. We were on Ms. Stream.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think also 91% actually struck me as really high. And I'm guessing that there's actually a very small number of households that are not participating in regular, like an even smaller number than 9%. Because I'll say I live on a staircase and there's 4 other houses on the staircase, and we just go in on one garbage can because it's in the same place for all of us. So I think that there's probably actually, this isn't the greatest cause of our problems, but I like Ms. Hale's idea about, for people where it really is a hardship, there's probably something we can do.
I like it. Any additional questions about medium term, midterm, what we need to be thinking of as the next step? Seeing none, we'll move on. We'll just jump into the long term. How many more years before the landfill is full at our current rate?
At our current rate, that's the important part.
Yes, sir.
20 years.
20 years. So do we have any information about if recycling percentages go up? How many, do we know how much waste we have to divert yearly to buy extra time?
I wouldn't say not off the top of my head, but the amount of waste that goes into the landfill right now is in the grand scheme of things small. So if you it would seem reasonable, I'd have to do the numbers, but it seemed reasonable to me that if you could increase recycling to the point where 50, you would cut the amount of waste going into the landfill by 25%, you get 25% more life, right? Yeah, I mean, it's all about the amount of waste that we take every day, and because it's such a small amount, and moving the needle on that small amount makes a big difference. That's probably the best way to put it.
Excellent. What are the post-closure requirements for the landfill? What happens in 20 years, sir?
Yeah, so we have to cover it with a what we call a final cover, right? Right now, the landfill, I'm going to say most of the landfill is got interim, what we call interim cover in it, on it. Final cover comes at closure. There's a whole DEC approved final cover program that goes on. So that goes in, gas systems, final gas systems have to be installed. And then once all of that is complete for our closure plan, then we go into what's called post-closure period. And that's 30 years. So we have to monitor, maintain, and keep all of those systems going for 30 years.
Okay. 30 years of looking after it. Explain the long-term operation of transfer stations. Compare the consumer costs of a landfill versus a long-term transfer station. What's the cost of being able to, what we do now versus if we began a transfer?
As I said before, transfer station is in between the consumer, the public, and commercial accounts and the landfill. So it's an added cost because you have to handle it at a transfer station, and then put it in a truck and haul it to the landfill to be disposed. So that all of the disposal costs that are at the landfill are still there. You have to, you still, with the transfer station, you have to still pay for, you know, the infrastructure costs to build the facility, all the fixed costs for that, and the labor to maintain it, keep it clean, and load the trucks and all of that stuff. So it's more expensive. Where transfer station long-term for here comes in play is when the landfill's closed, right? Because unless Juneau permits another landfill, right? All of Juneau's wastes will have to be shipped off to Seattle, and then wherever it would go from there, depending on who's got the contract for the waste.
Is an incinerator a good fit for Juneau? How much could an incinerator cost? What are your company's experience with incinerators or other thermal destruction technologies in other communities? Could you touch on operations and cost and practicality?
Want to say anything?
So I don't have a lot of experience with incinerators. They're very uncommon as far as I know, and everything I've read is they're extremely expensive to build, very, very difficult to permit. I'm not aware of any, certainly in our company, that are currently operating. So I don't have very limited experience as it relates to incinerators. Perhaps you.
Yeah, so incinerators are very expensive. There are a lot of air rules that govern incinerators, that the equipment to maintain those compliance levels are very expensive. So when we owned incinerators as waste management, you know, $500 to $700 million was not a high price for a municipal incinerator.
You said 500 to 700 million?
500 to 700 million. It's about economies of scale. So those facilities take 2,000 to 3,000 tons a day, right? In the waste industry, we talk about tons per day, right?
And Juno's is,
In Juneau, we're 100 tons per day.
Oh.
So it's a much smaller volume that you have to spread over the cost of the fixed cost and the operations of an incinerator. There are some out there that are made in Europe that, you know, can do up to 750 tons a day. You know, it's hard to throttle back an incinerator because when you start getting an incineration, you know, think about the garbage that comes in, you just can't throw it in the incinerator, right? But what has to happen when you feed an incinerator is it has to be consistent, or it upsets, right? So the person feeding the incinerator has to go, oh, there's a box, I'll grab that. No, there's this, I can grab that, and I can mix this with this. Oops, sorry. And it's not just throwing it in the incinerator, right? So is it feasible for Juneau? Maybe. But it would be a very small incinerator. And my sense is that the waste mix would be problematic. You don't have a whole bunch of waste that you can shove the bad stuff off to the side for a little bit and take a little bit of that, you know what I mean, and keep feeding the good stuff. So anything's possible. I used to say I could build $20 bills if you want to spend $100,000, but you know. So yeah, I mean, I think it may be feasible, but I will tell you it's not the sustainable choice. Burning trash. Okay. So
we'll keep rolling here. New landfill. How long would it take to permit a new landfill, and how much would a new landfill cost? And I believe this is for Mr. Blankenberg.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's I mean the answer to some degree is going to be it depends, but you know, typically, you know, for permitting, you know, you're looking at 6 months to a year. And if we're talking about a new landfill, you know, and a lot of it would be depend on the completeness and adequacy of the application materials. We would do a design review and approval, and usually that takes a few iterations. You know, actual permitting, you're going to have the you know, public process, and you know, working on you know, various operational operations plan review. The For a new landfill in Juneau, that's going to be a class 1 landfill. That's you know, over 20 tons a day of waste, which the current landfill is a class 1, but it's been in place so long that it doesn't it's not subject to all of the design requirements that apply to a new landfill. And so a new landfill, you're going to have a composite liner system, leachate collection system, groundwater monitoring system, possibly surface water down there, depending on the site, landfill gas monitoring system. And so, and there could be a lot of site preparation costs depending on the adequacy of the site. I kind of, when I took a look at this, I kind of threw out a real rough number of 15 to 20 million to build something like this, but it could vary a lot. We've approved in the last few years at other class 1 landfills where they've done like a lined expansion, and those have run $6 or $7 million a piece. But you have to remember that those already have an existing, you know, the rest of the infrastructure is already in place, and so you're just designing and building a new cell, and maybe have to do some, you know, plumbing to plumb it into the leachate collection system. So, you know, that's where I come up with the rough number, but you know, material costs can vary, and what have you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. PFAS. Are there any plans to regulate PFAS in landfills in Alaska? And are you aware of plans to regulate PFAS in the landfills in the Pacific Northwest? And again, that's for Mr. Blankenberg.
Yes. I don't know the details with the Pacific Northwest. For Alaska, right now we can theoretically regulate PFAS right now. But there's a couple of I think a couple of complicating factors that go into where PFAS goes in the future. First, EPA is looking at including PFAS as a on the hazardous constituent list under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. That's subtitle C under that, which is the hazardous waste rules. And to start with, that list means that if you had a site where you had to clean it up, that would be one of the constituents they have to look at. But where EPA is looking toward in the future is potentially listing at least 4 of the PFAS chemicals as hazardous waste. And if that happens, it's probably going to change the game. But it's hard to know how yet, because PFAS is in a lot of things we use, clothing, carpeting, those type of things that, and granted, it's getting phased out, and I don't know what it's getting replaced with, if it's any better, but it's in the landfill already. And so, and we know it's in there. Places where they've sampled for PFAS have generally found it. But what we've looked at short term, where we've at least had concern, is the AFFF, the firefighting foam. It's in the process of getting phased out, but it's also still required. And so, to the extent that somebody has to dispose of that, we've been kind of discouraging it getting disposed in state of Alaska landfills. The company, at least one of the companies that handles hazardous waste in the state, they currently ship it out to a facility in I think it's in Idaho, a subtitle C hazardous waste landfill, even though it's not currently regulated as a hazardous waste. But they're doing that as a precaution, I think, and so that's one area. A couple other areas that we're at least keeping an eye on, where you have maybe a more of a point source. One is contaminated soil cleanup. There's a lot of contaminated soil in places where mostly where the AFFF got used. So, you're talking about airports in a lot of cases where they either had fire training or they actually maybe had to put out a fire with it. And so you have contaminated soil there. And that's something the landfills generally don't want to take. A class 1 landfill could take it by rule, but in most cases, we haven't seen anyone that's really jumping up and down about taking it. The other one, I think Juneau's aware of this, is in biosolids, sewage sludge. It's because it's used so ubiquitously, the public, it's been in products for a number of years. It's winding up at the end of the pipe and falling out in the biosolids, and that's kind of created a new challenge. And what do you do with biosolids, where in the past land application was an option, and it's still an option, but now you've got the PFAS there, and that's a concern. And so it's not banned from going to a landfill, but and maybe it's the best bad option, but it's something that we're keeping an eye on. And as EPA is setting standards and tightening standards, right now they've promulgated a potential drinking water level, and it's very low. So it is something that we're looking at, but it's a little bit of it's hard to know where it's in terms of landfills where it's going to go. But my guess is if they end up listing it as a hazardous waste, that's going to tighten things up that much more.
Thank you, Mr. Blankenberg.
Yes.
Gentlemen, would you like to comment on how PFAS is impacting the landfill here?
So, yeah, so the first thing is, and the most important thing is landfills are receivers. We don't generate it. We don't use it. We get it from the volumes that come in. And I'm only speaking for waste management now. When PFAS started to rise to become an issue, we looked at all of our 400 and whatever landfills and said, these are the landfills that can take PFAS materials. And generally, you know, what we look at is the environmental setting, right? Whether or not it discharges to a publicly owned treatment works, and what kind of liner system it has. You know, frankly, Juneau has the worst of all of those three categories. So we don't take it in Juneau in this environmental setting. So we are diverting anything that has PFAS in it. It goes to our facility, our hazardous waste facility in Arlington, Oregon. Because there's some legislation at this point for both landfills and POTWs, and maybe I'm not using the right word, but there is an understanding that the discharge from landfills, meaning leachate, and the discharge from POTWs, municipal wastewater treatment plants, should be excluded from the CERCLA rules, because it's really more of an upstream, you know, it's kind of like stormwater. You don't try to fix the pipe, you fix what got the stuff to the pipe, right? So PFAS is being phased out, although right now I think there's 4,000 compounds, PFAS compounds. Can't measure them all, but PFAS is a big problem, and it's just not a big problem for it's a big problem for the world. So, you know, we measure PFAS in parts per trillion, right? That's a very it's less than one drop in a swimming pool. It's very small amount. And as the gentleman from DEC said, you know, it's ubiquitous, which means it's everywhere. It's in everything and it's in everybody. And, you know, there are some studies out that says when it rains PFAS at 20 parts per trillion. So it's not going to be an easy answer. But we're doing everything that we can in Juneau and many, many other places to make sure that we're doing the right thing by the environment and getting those wastes to the right place.
Thank you, sir. All right, questions from the committee? Mr. Smith? Ms. Lane, hold one moment. Mr. Smith, Lane, did you want to comment on PFAS?
I don't want to comment on PFAS. I just wanted to add some more information to Assembly Member Smith's question from earlier.
Go ahead.
About regulating. So aside from, I looked up chapter 16 in the state statutes, because I was thinking about like, you know, why are we allowed to regulate bars? And it's because we are given authority by the state to regulate. bars. And that is why we can demand that they be closed at a certain hour, because the state gives us that power. And scrolling through all the different regulations on landfills, we don't have the authority to regulate them in the same way.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry if I missed it from Mr. Blankenberg. He mentioned that they had recently permitted like landfill expansions. Have there been new landfills permitted by DEC anyway in Southeast in the last 10 years?
Mr. Blankenberg, did you hear the question, sir?
Yes, I did. I could not think of any new landfills we've done in Southeast in the last 10 years. In the state, we have periodically have had new landfills. Primarily, they've been in our small rural communities in Western Alaska, Northwest Alaska. We've also permitted some non-municipal landfills, so those would be landfills that companies would use, that type of thing. But I can't think of a brand new one in Southeast Alaska.
Thank you, sir. Follow up, Mr. Smith.
Thanks. I guess, no, that's helpful. Thank you. And, I guess there's many reasons that could be people didn't apply for them or whatever, but does anyone have comment on like, I've just heard that there's no way a new landfill would be permitted in Juneau. I mean, anyway, is that, and I don't know if that's just the economics or the site locations or just the permitting is, anyway.
Just a challenge of a new landfill in Juneau.
Not from us. So we don't have a prohibition or anything like that. I don't know if somebody maybe came up with that from a different perspective, like not having the place to put it, that type of thing. I mean, certainly you have different challenges in Southeast Alaska than some places, primarily the precipitation, but those can be worked with. But I know that Juneau, like a lot of Southeast Alaska, it's not like you have just endless space to go with, so that could have been a factor, but we haven't weighed in on anything like that.
Mr. Denson.
So again, it's really about volume, right? And the financial risk that we take for the volume that Juneau produces. I think he's, Mr. Lincolnberg is dead on. To permit a new landfill hadn't been done in a long time. Your 10-year window, it's even longer than that. And to be honest, the permitting and the authority from the state through the environmental regulations, that's very, very easy compared to public outcry, right? Public outcry, a company could spend $10 million designing and putting all the pieces in place to get to an application that you can give to the state, but then it goes public and the public can shut that $10 million down in a heartbeat, right? So it's not so much contingent on whether it can be done, is whether Juneau wants it to be done. That's really the more important question.
Right.
And then just one more thing, Chair Bryson. It's always better to expand a landfill that's already there, because you have all the infrastructure already in place. Everybody kind of knows where it's at. There's a lot of benefit to just doing an expansion versus trying to site a new one somewhere. I will give you the fact that, you know, capital landfill is right in the middle of everything, right? I understand that. So expansion may not be a possibility, but.
All right. I was gonna, let Ms. Trina get a question in. No, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This might be a question for Bob. Nice to see you, Bob. Mr. Blankenberg or Mr. Denson. And the question is about leachate from our landfill because it's not a lined facility, as I understand it. And I do know there has been some testing that indicates there is leachate, and I'm just wondering if we have any kind of a program to actually monitor leachate and the extent of what that might be.
Mr. Denson.
By that, I mean, not just monitoring the leachate, but monitoring the environment for leachate that may be contaminating the environment, the water quality.
Right. So that's a very large question, but I'll try to answer it for you. We do monitor our leachate for PFAS because it goes to the public treatment works. They've requested that we monitor that, and we do monitor leachate. What I will say about the PFAS that are in the landfill in Juneau is compared to our other facilities, it's very, very dilute, which means it's much lower in concentration than facilities, you know, in the lower 48. The leachate, because it can't mix with stormwater, right? It has to be collected and sent to the POTW, to your treatment works. It really doesn't mix with groundwater, and we don't see it in the groundwater at Juneau. Not to say that we wouldn't see it in the future, right? But generally, when you see PFAS in groundwater, it's more around manufacturing facilities that generate lots and lots and lots of PFAS effluents. And so I guess the risk is really low, is what I would say. So did that answer your question? Go ahead, Ms. Hill.
Not quite.
Okay.
That's one component. I'm really, I think, referring to surface water.
Right.
And it's not just PFAS, but other contaminants that might be in leachate or might be in runoff that contacts surface water. Because as we know, our landfill is in the middle of a wetlands. So that's really the question. And is there any kind of monitoring, water quality monitoring for other components, not just PFAS, that may be impacting surface water?
So actually, in Alaska, as opposed to many other states, we're doubly regulated on surface water. There are surface water regulations in Alaska that we're held to, those discharges. And then there are also federal stormwater permits that we have that were regulated for those contaminants. At this time, there's no neither plan envisions PFAS sampling, right? Because it's everywhere. So I guess to answer your question honestly is we don't test for it.
Again, I'm not just talking about PFAS.
Okay.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah,
Maybe
many
Michelle,
other.
Michelle or Ms. Hale. I think, I mean, to your general question, we our regs, you know, and based on federal regs, we're in a groundwater program. You're going to be monitoring for a set of parameters that it's in 40 CFR 258, and those are parameters that are potentially present in municipal solid waste. So there's Juneau, like the other facilities, is subject to that list, and any additional ones that the state would add on. I can't tell you off the top of my head what we've added on, but they would be subject to Appendix 1 in 258. And then with surface water, which I believe Juneau's doing some surface water, it may be the same list, but that one would be imposed by the by us. And like Mr. Denson mentioned, stormwater rules also come into play, but I think that's a much smaller list of parameters that are required under Clean Water Act on that one.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much. Thanks, Mr. Denson, very much. And thanks, Mr. Blankenberg.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Denson, you obviously be a business decision, but I mean, can the Juneau land, I mean, do you own adjacent space? Like, could the Juneau landfill be expanded?
Yes. Yes. The expansion of the landfill, as Mr. Brandenburg, thank you, said would require us to upgrade our liner systems, more cost, which is fine. We don't have an issue with that at all. And it would, unfortunately, the expansion to the south would be in a wetland, which would be problematic. We have neighbors to the east and neighbors to the west, but yes, we could expand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've been talking about this for a very long time. And I have thought and continue to think that CBJ's main role, maybe not only role, but main role should probably be in working to get the community of Juneau to produce less waste. So we've talked about zero waste plans, and I'm just curious, you've probably told us, and I don't remember where we are in that process. And then also subset to that question, would a materials study be part of that kind of process?
So a waste audit would be a valuable addition, just to look at, how different or not is Juneau from the national average. We have somewhat guesstimated, we haven't asked consultants for estimates, but we're guessing that's going to be probably in the $50,000 sort of range to do some of that audit work. In terms of zero waste, right now we've primarily we have certainly much more planning to do, more planning ahead of us than behind us. But I think a lot of the things that CBJ does on the side as part of that zero waste, our recycling efforts, our junk vehicle efforts, our household hazardous waste efforts. We've recently received some congressionally directed spending, formerly known as earmarks, for a compost facility that the vision is that the city would construct and then would have a private entity run that compost facility, just like we do with hazardous waste, just like we do with recycling, and just like we do with junk vehicles. So, but there's certainly more to be done on that effort. It is challenging to get Americans to produce less trash.
Ms. Hale.
That was kind of a perfect segue. Composting. I know that we have that congressionally directed spending. Got to remember that term. And we also have a member of our audience who has done a lot of composting in Juneau, and I'm really glad to see you here. And I know that we have tried to figure out how that would work. And can you just give us an update and the public, I guess, an update on where CBJ's at with the planning for that right now?
Well, we're at the very beginning stages because we had, even though it's wonderful and we're very excited that we received that congressionally directed spending, that appropriation, there's of course a big gap between when announcements are made that the federal government is going to give you money and when you actually get that money. And we had put in an we have to put in an application. There's a whole process that we'll have to do with the congressionally directed spending. And we just recently heard from EPA and made some contact with them to try and understand what the parameters are surrounding the requirements. So we're just beginning to get a handle on that.
All good, Ms. Hill. Mr. Smith. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I was just curious to know, does anyone have any idea on, should we have to start shipping our waste out of town? What, I know there's a lot of dynamic factors into that cost, but what the increase or what the change in price to do that would be?
Anybody want to take a guess at how much more it would be to ship our trash out of town?
It's more than what you're paying at the landfill right now. There's way too many variables at this point. Really the bottom line is, Juneau needs to take control over the waste that they generate. The city and borough of Juneau needs to do that. Because if you don't, then you're asking business to take a risk to build something that you and they don't have any control over, right? And it makes it very hard for a company to come in and want to spend however many millions to do whatever they want to do when there's no certainty that they're going to get what they built this thing for. I have a good example and I'm trying to decide whether I should use it. And forgive me, but so Alaska Waste, and I'm not speaking for Alaska Waste, but we have a lot of hauling companies. There's a lot of capital expenditure, you have trucks, people, all of that stuff. They've got an RCT license, right? And the expectation is, they got a license, they should be the ones picking up the material. But what's happening in Juneau, because Juneau doesn't control their destiny, they don't have rules and regulations around solid waste or recycling, is there are other folks out there who are entrepreneurs, right, that are picking that material up out of his pocket, right, and bringing it to the landfill themselves. They're offering a service, right, which great, that's the American way. But that's a really great example of why it would be really problematic for someone to make a very large investment, the investment that it takes to put in this piece of infrastructure if there's no certainty that they have that they're going to get whatever they need to process it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Very much so.
Thanks.
Ms. Shreen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the parts of our destiny that we can control, is there anything we can do within the organization of CBJ to examine the amount of waste that, and hopefully lower, that would be worth it, that would be worth whatever additional cost or time or resources?
Deputy Director Koch.
Oh, that's a great question. And I think it might be one that we have to somewhat mull over, but it is challenging. And as Mr. Denson said, for CBJ, from a staff perspective, since we don't regulate, operate, own, there are things that we could do, but essentially we're just nibbling around the edges of the garbage problem. And even for things like recycling, which is always very, very popular. We are, with our current facility, doing everything in terms of same policies, same budget. If we kept everything the same, we're getting pretty close to max capacity. So even if we wanted to increase recycling in a dramatic way, which could be something that CBJ could take on, that would, there are various ways that you could do that, but it could mean CBJ contracting with waste management for a bigger facility. We wanted to keep everything the same. It could look like CBJ potentially incentivizing or requiring, that would depend on how far the assembly wanted to go, more curbside recycling, and you can make the whole facility a commingled facility. That comes with trade-offs, and some of the trade-offs were discussed earlier. You do get more contamination in a commingled waste stream than in a single waste stream. That being said, although Juneau does definitely have contamination in its recycling stream, just like every community in America, our rates of contamination are generally pretty good. That's what we've heard from the waste management facilities, that we stack up pretty well compared to other communities. So there are some opportunities there for recycling, but they would probably they would require some change in budget or change in policies, because we're close to our max with our current situation.
All right, I'm going to go to Ms. Hale. As we're getting towards the end of our time, we want to leave some time for public testimony, but Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for you, Deputy Director Koch. Back to the zero waste plan. When we first started talking about this, or when we were talking about this a couple of years ago, I think we talked a lot about stakeholders and community engagement, and maybe it's forming a board. I can't remember exactly what we were talking about, but it was obvious then, and then we've had COVID, and it's obvious even now, and Mr. Denson talks about it, that the community really, really has to get on board. And we had talked, when we were coming up with the idea of the zero waste plan, that is a mechanism, a robust mechanism for the community to get on board. All that said, I understand there's a ton of things that the Public Works and Engineering Department work on. And I guess my question to you is, where do you feel that we are in actually taking steps so that we've got that stakeholder working group, or whatever we end up calling it, so we actually have the community, beginning of the community engagement that we need to have?
So I think our first step in that we've taken in terms of zero waste planning more recently was to hire, to create a new position to deal with solid waste at CBJ. And then we had Diana come on in November, and she's been great in reaching out to many of the stakeholders and working very closely with Stuart, who's been our longtime subject matter expert on recycling and those sorts of things. We certainly need to do, stakeholder work and more outreach. Part of what we are juggling is we're in a very fortunate time in that there are many grant opportunities. And I think there's been certainly a lot of interest from the community and from the assembly and us pursuing grant opportunities. And those have been coming somewhat hot and heavy, and they have pretty short turnaround times. And that's because of that, that's somewhat necessitated and directed some of our short-term focus has really been on some of that grant planning. So for example, Diana, who's occupying that role, has applied for a Swiffer grant, which is another compost grant, a recycling grant. We're planning on applying for another grant that has a deadline on April 14th with the Department of Energy. That's a technology assistance grant that could help us provide some technical assistance on things, on questions like the thermal treatment, or, sort of layman's terms, incineration. Would that be a good fit for Juneau? Yes or no? Could that help us? Is there a silver bullet out there that could help us for some of those PFAS items? So those have been, we definitely have that stakeholder work to do in a more formal way. There's been a lot of informal communication, but I think just the reality is we've been chasing a lot of grants short term.
Thank you, Deputy Director Koch. I'm going to just ask one of my favorite questions, no matter what we're talking about. You got a magic wand, Mr. Denson, and you can do something and just make it happen in Juneau. You snap your fingers. What would you like to see in Juneau that would improve the post-collection component of Juneau's waste stream?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think, I don't believe in magic, number one. There's no, this is
One wish then.
This is a really complex problem, and many municipalities wrestle with this, you know, all the time. There's no one thing that can fix this. It's going to be a compilation of many things to get Juneau where they need to be. The hard part about Juneau is you got 20 years to do it, right? So most municipalities don't have a time frame like that. They're much longer out. So yeah, I can't give you it's really everything we talked about, right? And all of those pieces aren't going to fall into place easily. So
Yes, sir. Although, Mr. Simonton, I'm going to ask you the same question. If there was something that Juneau could just do that would make collections more effective, more efficient, less expensive.
Well, I think one thing that we do well is we partner with our customers. We're already handling the material, whether it can be diverted or not. And I think one of the focuses, it sounds, is really focused on recycling and diverting is going to help kind of the whole big picture of what we can do down the road. So I think if I were going to take some immediate steps, is try to grow that, you know, kind of focus on what that means. And it could be, you know, like I said, we partner with our customers to whatever they want to do. So whether it be education, this is why we want to do it as a community, whether there's some sort of incentivized programs that CBJ can put out there to help subsidize, you know, low income or whatever it may be. I think, you know, we have an opportunity, you know, I take a lot of pride in our partnerships with our customers. And I think if we stay engaged and we focus on small things that we can do, we can kind of tackle the bigger problems as they come down and keep kind of prolong these years as much as we can by diverting as much. So I think that's kind of the biggest opportunity in short term to try to help the long term.
Excellent. So I'm going to open it up to public testimony. Hopefully, if they drive some burning question, we'll have an opportunity at the end to ask the questions. And I believe at this point, Mr. Crabtree. Mr. Bergstrom, if you would join us. Yep, right up here. Yes, sir. Don't worry about it. If you would state your name and area of town you live in, and you have 2 minutes.
Frank Bergstrom, Lemon Creek. It's more like a light. Okay, Frank Bergstrom, Lemon Creek. I'm a neighbor of the landfill. Couple things, 3 things, actually. You mentioned offsite disposal, shipping waste south. That's what the rest of Southeast does. So plenty of data on that. Just ask around any other community in Southeast. Second thing is on construction debris. I didn't hear anything about stumps and grubbing waste. And there's overlap there, huge overlap with our housing issue and expensive housing. When you got to put your stumps into the dump, that's a lot of weight and that's a lot of cost. So something for you guys to think about when we always talk about the cost of housing in Juneau. That's one thing that really adds to the cost. So something to think about there. The third thing is the one bit of veering things off of the dump is composting that came up. The city's got $2.5 million soon to be in its pocket and potentially another 4 million they're going for. That's a lot of money burning a hole in your pocket, and we'd certainly promote, and I'm speaking on behalf of First Things First Alaska Foundation here, that we would spend that money in a logical way to support private industry in any way we can, and certainly not do harm to private industry. And that I think, and that we think, a way that the city could do that would be to promote markets and develop and expand the market for compost, which is really gardening. And what are you doing when you make compost? You're making garden soil. So if the city was to take some of that money and make some greenhouses, which I think, I would assume you would agree, is an excellent way to take advantage of gardening and be effective at it around here. That to build some greenhouses for folks like the community garden program right now. Get more people using that stuff, and you can use more of it up, and you can promote its production in the private industry.
Excellent. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Bergstrom? Ms. Hale?
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Bergstrom. Nice to see you. You mentioned first things first, and greenhouses in Alaska can be very expensive because of heat requirements, or just the land. If CBJ were to go in that direction, which also could be very good for confidence in our food supply, would first things first consider that a first thing, greenhouses?
Oh, I think so. I mean, obviously that to me is the way to grow the market. There's probably other ways to grow the market, but that is the logical way to grow the market. And if you're trying to maximize the diversion of those things, and you've got it here on your pie diagram of food is 22%. That's probably not quite accurate for Juneau, I would say, but nonetheless, it's a significant portion of the waste stream. If you were to divert 22% of the waste away from the dump and make garden soil out of it, you got to have a place to go with it. So build some greenhouses. You got $6.5 million potentially to do that with. And you've got a lot of land. You don't have to buy the land. You already own it.
Any additional questions for Mr. Bergstrom? Mr. Bergstrom, thank you so much for coming and testifying on behalf of First Things First. I'm going to open it up to the audience. Even if you didn't sign up, did something spark your mind while you were listening to the conversations? Ma'am, please come up and join us. If you would say your name and area town that you live in for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
Yeah. I'm Anna. I work with KTOO and I live downtown. I had 2 questions that are super distinct, so I don't want to take up time with both of them. But I guess one thing is just that generally we know a lot of these efforts to divert waste streams, whether they be composting or increasing recycling, et cetera, take time. Sometimes it takes years just to get the money into the pockets of the city. So I guess I just have a question of generally if diversion is even feasible before we start to come up on a much shorter timeline of the landfill filling up. It seems to me like the solutions are potentially not going to keep pace with the rate at which the landfill is filling up. So that's just a really general question about making those timelines compatible. And I guess I'll just open it up to general thoughts on that, because it was the question that was coming up for me a lot.
Deputy Director Koch, do you want to maybe sum that up?
I could weigh in, but I think that would be a great area for waste management and Alaska Waste to jump in. I do think that with 20 years of lead time that we could make some real inroads to diversion, but I think I would defer to the waste experts that we've brought here today.
So you're right. Large scale programs take a while to get set up, but there are things. I mean, the best way to manage waste and food waste and doing compost is right where it's generated, right? Some municipalities have used grants to give out small composters to residents and then teach them how to use it, right? That keeps that material where it's at. It doesn't have to go anywhere in a car or a truck, right? Highly sustainable. So managing it better at the source is always better. Your buying power as the public speaks volumes to producers. So do you buy something that has 5 times more packaging than it needs? Or do you buy something that's maybe a little more expensive, but has a lot less packaging that has to be dealt with? So it's those kinds of concepts, right? I think Juneau has, as Director Koch said, I think Juneau has time to get large scale programs in place, but the time to start is now, right?
Excellent. Did you want to go ahead and ask your second question? We seem to have just a couple minutes left here in the meeting.
And I don't even really know if somebody here will be able to speak to this, but one question I had on my mind, and I think it's just because it's my first tourist season here, is that the last time we had full scale cruise ships, there was a question of how much waste cruise ships were dumping in the landfill. Given that the city doesn't have a ton of power to, I mean, when that happened, it seemed that the city didn't have a ton of power to limit that industry from dumping. And since Waste Management is a private company, there's some complication on managing, I guess, large waste streams that come from outside of just regular residents. So I guess like if there are thoughts on how to deal with that, and since I know we're having increasing tourism this year and potentially continuing to do that.
I believe that we have some agreement in place. Ms. Stream, did you want to?
We do, and that's been part of the I think the MOA that Mr. Watt has signed with CLIA, but even prior to signing anything, the CLIA Alaska had committed to not, they were dumping mattresses, and that was the big thing that people were concerned about, and they committed to stopping that, I think pre-pandemic even. So it is something that we have worked out an arrangement with.
All right. Did anyone want to add to that? Ms. Hale.
It's just my understanding, and thank you, Ms. Treem. There is definitely the memorandum of agreement that's been signed with the CLIA and the cruise industry, but it's also my understanding that per ocean law, I don't know exactly what it's called, we have to take garbage. It's just that the cruise industry understands that it's a problem for communities, and they actually do quite an amazing job on board ship at reducing garbage and on managing it really well. So if you can take a tour of below decks on one of those ships, they really do an amazing job. They pay a lot of attention to that.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Hale. That was actually going to be the comment I was going to make, is that maybe that's the lesson that we can learn from the cruise industry. Those guys have mastered sorting trash and collecting it and then holding on to it to get it to the right destination. So thank you for that. Let me make one quick announcement here that questions, we'll accept questions from the in-person, but Zoom participants can email your questions to boroughAssembly@juneau.gov. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just so I have a sense of scale, do we know how much of the annual waste that goes to the dump is from the cruise ship? I mean, just in like a percentage ballpark range, do you know? Okay.
Well, since there's been no cruise ships, it's been zero, but
Last year.
yeah, I would say that the MOA that you all put together has severely restricted it. And it's, I don't think it's inconsequential, but it's certainly not 20% or something like that. It's not a large, I would say, it's relative to the same amounts that other industry in the city dispose of.
Excellent. And so that does bring us to our time. And so I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. I'd like to thank the panelists and assembly members for coming to yet one more meeting. Thank you, guys. We obviously have a lot of information to digest now. I'm just very optimistic at the level of information that has been presented today, that we've got all these great minds coming together. we'll come up with some active solutions and have another meeting in the future that can talk about some real world actions that we can take. And with that, meeting adjourned.
Great job.
Thank you, Ms.